Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse. Into the Afroverse, we're taking Black folks into the future, and I'm your host, William Jones. You know, when we talk about Afrofuturism, I've had guests on that were part of the literary world. We've had comic book creators and other types of artists. We've had intellectuals, but we have not covered the world of cuisine. And a lot of people, when they think of Afrofuturism, you know, one of the things that folks want to keep in mind is this thing is limitless in terms of the way it has influenced Black culture here in the US and the way it's growing into so many realms. And today's guest, Keem Hugley, is a 15-year hospitality visionary, bringing a creative edge and special authenticity to the industry as a native Washingtonian. From a teen, Keem's hospitable ambition was driven by creating spaces for his peers in DC's go-go culture. His contributions led him to multiple awards of the Promoter of the Year, leaving a lasting impact on the city's cultural history. As his event production career progressed, he stepped into the role of events manager at Ajax and hosted such clients as Facebook, Apple, Viacom, Masterclass, and many others. In 2016, he transitioned into becoming director of sales for Chef Eric Bruner, Yang's foreign national projects such as the Line Hotel, Mikado, ABC Pony, and various consulting. As now partner of a foreign national, he specializes in restaurant operations, optimizing profits and sales. Presently, Keem is creating or has created a new hospitality group that has opened a flagship concept, Bronze, which will offer world-class culinary experience from the perspective of Afrofuturism. And with that, I'd like to welcome my guest, Keem Hugley. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, once again, thank you for being part of here Into the Afroverse. So just to kind of go over a few things, what exactly got you into the restaurant business? What brought you into that world?
So I've been in hospitality for 16 years. I've been in restaurants specifically for about the last 7, 8 years. And I think my original vehicle to get into restaurants were through events. So in restaurants, um, one of the core important parts of the business is hosting weddings, hosting corporate events, hosting birthdays, and it's a celebration business. So that's how I first got into restaurants.
Excellent. Now, what was it about Afrofuturism that attracted you, and what gave you this idea to kind of blend both of those worlds?
So originally, I've worked with Eric for about 7 years, and I was basically like the number two for Eric and director of sales. I moved into being a partner of that company, and then I started to realize that I can do this thing for myself.
Mhm.
Um, and when doing that, I was figuring out what concept I wanted to create for the restaurant that I wanted to open. And when I discovered Afrofuturism a lot through Yatasha Womack and others, I realized that I didn't have to prescribe to the world prescribe to what the world has created for me.
Mhm.
And when I was originally thinking about the idea, it was like soul food and kind of like hip hop stuff that just didn't really fit well with me creatively. It's not who it is that I am.
Mhm.
And I was trying to figure out what vessel, what vehicle I use to be able to tell my story authentically. And that's when I discovered Afrofuturism, and the rest is history from there.
Now, this is the first of its type. I haven't heard of any other restaurant incorporating Afrofuturism.
Yeah, this is the first Afrofuturistic restaurant in the world.
Excellent. So what was the response from people when you began to share this idea You receive a lot of support, a lot of pushback, with people kind of questioning where was this coming from. What was the response like?
I think it's mixed because Afrofuturism is so new, and then also Afrofuturism is such a individualized idea.
Yes.
Because what I think about Afrofuturism, what you think about Afrofuture could be two completely different things, and they're both Afrofuturism at its core. So that's a very rare thing, but it also creates a lot of opinions.
Mm-hmm.
For people that are just getting introduced into Afrofuturism, they have this idea of what it looks like, and that might not be, what it is that it looks like for me. So I think that would be the biggest feedback that we've got when we first opened, along with just so much support from people just feeling like, oh, this is new. It's a breath of fresh air. It's not just the same thing over and over again. But then you also have people who are a little bit confused by it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's good because it creates positive dialogue.
Let's see. And real quick, I want to get this out the way early. We're going to go back to it. But where are you located?
I'm Washington D.C., so on H Street corridor in Washington D.C. We're right next to the AutoZone parking lot, so that's kind of like famous parking lot in DC for mostly bad reasons, but it is a landmark. And we want to add value to the block. When you go to New York, the best restaurants are not in Manhattan or Times Square. The
Right.
best restaurants are when you kind of go into like these little neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens and all these type of places. So I think being able to offer this level of experience on H Street is the whole idea of kind of like Afrofuturism, is that we can do it for us in our neighborhoods, and we don't have to just go downtown to be able to get those things.
Excellent. So that's the physical address. How can folks find you online if they want to get a reservation, find out more about the restaurant?
Yeah, so pretty much everything happens through the Instagram. So Bronze DC at Bronze DC. You'll be able to find everything that you need from there.
Excellent. So how does one incorporate Afrofuturism into food? I'm sure folks are listening, and like you said, it's a new concept for a lot of people, and folks that are even familiar with it may be questioning, how does one incorporate Afrofuturistic ideas and so forth into a restaurant? Can you walk people through it? What can we expect when we enter into your space?
Yeah, for sure. So it's really about unchaining the mind and unchaining what is known for, my prototype, my makeup. And when you do that, it's like it becomes like this like imagined realities to where what does the dish look like
Right.
when we go back to the 1300s and we take Alonzo Bronze back to the 1300s? That's where we take him to in our story,
Mm-hmm.
and we take them all the way up into present time. We make them like this like time traveler. What does it look like when we take slavery out of that story and we keep our ancestors the same ancestors, but we unchain our ancestors to where they traveled the world freely, and they weren't traveling the world in boats and in chains. They were traveling the world however everybody else was traveling at that time. What does that look like in 2023? What does that dish look like? It's going to look a little bit different than what we know it as. So when we first started to create the menu, we had to say, we have access to everything in the world. We have access to any ingredient. We have access to any cooking technique, and let's create from the perspective of limitless
Mm-hmm.
rather than the perspective of not having, which is
Wow.
typically what we're creating from when we're creating from the Black perspective. Because for the past 500-600 years, we've created from lack. In
Mm-hmm.
every movie that you see, every story that you see is it's like this struggle story and
Right.
all these type of things. And at some point we have to be not comfortable with just creating from that all the time.
Right.
And the they are Black trauma us to death.
Yes.
Um, and I tell people all the time, I'm like, and this was a long process of like
Right.
actually being able to unchain my own mind. Because I'm like, man, is the expectation in 2023 that I cook what my ancestors ate as slaves? It's like, is that expectation still hold in the year 2023? And if I don't cook that, then both sides will look at it as an unauthentic experience. Like, man, we got to break all that.
Right, right. So, what I like about that response, and I don't know if anyone's ever used this term, but I'm going to use it right here. I like this idea of like liberation cuisine, this
Exactly.
idea of using food as a tool of liberation. Because, like you said, there's a lot to be said for the Black diet here in the US. And like you said, so much of it is linked to enslavement, our past, and so forth. And that has its place, okay? And it needs to be respected
Yes,
and
for sure.
understood. But what I like
100%.
what you're talking about is moving us forward. And like you said, that's what Afrofuturism is all about, actually moving us forward and kind of putting us in a different space mentally. And since you're talking about food, physically as well, because
So
go
so
ahead.
you have to be careful because people people like what's the saying they say, throw the baby out with
Yes,
the bath water.
right,
Um, so when people start to hear these type of things, they try, oh, you just like discrediting the
right,
ancestors, man. You not respecting what it is that we came from and all these type of things. I'm like, no, I am.
right,
But I wanna imagine James Hemings. Um, imagine Hercules, who
right,
was these were cooks for Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. These were the best cooks in the land, but they were slaves.
right,
But they were
right,
slaves. Imagine James Hemings, but imagine that he wasn't a slave in his time, but he was still the best cook in the land. But he can go and open his own restaurant, his own
right,
hotel, and get a loan from the bank and be able to compound that interest over 200 or 300 years and pass it down through generations and be able to come the Hemmings Hotel,
right.
which is like the Hilton Hotel. We haven't been afforded this opportunity. So in the year 2023, what I say is that I go back and I unleash the story of James Hemings. I don't look at him as a
Awesome.
slave. I look at him as being able to do that. And for me, I say what I challenge my teams on in this year is I say, imagine that this story happened the way that we're telling the story to happen.
Right,
What would that experience look like if James Hemings had 300 years of compound success in his family? It'll look like soft architecture with curvature and certain type of, the way that the seats feel and in the plates and the ingredients that we use. We're creating from something that doesn't exist. So you
right.
can't put the world's what has actually happened in the world. You can't put those limitations on me.
No, I certainly get it. I certainly get it. That is awesome. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. And today we're joined with Keem Hugley, uh, founder, creator of Bronze Restaurant right here in Washington, D.C. What I like is, people often talk about moving forward in all these other areas except food. And I guess to your point, the idea is you're respecting the history, you're respecting your ancestors and what they prepared. But I guess even they would say it's 2023. You guys are still eating the same stuff that we ate. We
And, and,
prepared this so that you prepare something different moving forward. So I certainly get your point.
and you know why I can I'm looking at your face right now and I see the excitement because that's the excitement that we should feel when
Right.
we talk about what the future is. Cause like when we go back and free the people who created us, it's a certain type of excitement that happens around that. So
Certainly.
sometimes people confuse my futurism with wanting to discredit the past,
Right.
and it's definitely not that. It's like I want to respect them so much that they would look at us crazy that y'all still cooking that.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
Do you know what we had? We didn't really have much. We
Right,
expect to take this, like,
right,
unleash me, let me go. Like,
right,
let's travel the world. Let's travel different universes. Let's travel different worlds. We're limitless. We show no bounds. We could do anything it is that we want to do. This is the mindset that we need to start creating from to be able to start pushing the envelope and start to catch up on this race. When we created Alonzo Bronze, we created Alonzo Bronze because there's no legacy characters that are from the Afro perspective, because that story hasn't really been allowed to happen.
mhm,
And and to be more specific, is that think about the biggest luxury brands in the world. All these luxury brands are legacy families.
yes,
Louis Vuitton, Tiffany's, Dior, Christian Dior. These are people, but they've been allowed to start in the 1600s with a handbag or with a perfume, and then they compounded that over years and years and years and years. And now you look at them, it's this really aged brand that has all this legacy and all these type of things. We haven't been afforded that legacy because
right,
of racism. We couldn't go to the bank and get the loan. Um, we couldn't openly have a business that everybody would support and be allowed to support by
right,
federal standards. So what does this look like? It looks like we're all starting in the past 50, 60 years. And when you understand compound success, nothing really happens in 50, 60 years.
right,
All these things are two, 300, 400 years.
right.
When you look at the biggest brand in the world, which is LVMH, look at their portfolio. Nothing has happened in the last 50, 60 years, except for maybe Fenty.
Right, right. And once again, I just love the way the direction that the conversation is going. So now we're talking about time and space. All too often, I think that we misunderstand time. And yeah, we think that if something's been around for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that that's legacy. And to your point, yeah, much of the wealth in this country dates back to the founding of this country.
Old
And,
money.
and we were divorced from that. We were separated from that. We couldn't participate in that. So I really like the way that you're laying this out. And it's giving us, our community, our people, something to shoot for, to ascribe to. So I think that that's great. So you keep talking about Alonzo Bronze,
Yep.
and that's the name of the restaurant, the Bronze. Can you give us a little bit more in terms of where he comes from? What is his story, and how you
So
incorporated that into, the restaurant?
So Alonzo Bronze is a sci-fi character
Mhm.
that I created. Originally, I didn't create a person. Originally, I just created the idea of bronze. So
Right,
the original name of the restaurant, which is Bronze, but bronze was more of an idea. Bronze wasn't a person. It's still similar, um, but Afrofuturism has allowed me to say no, we have to create a person, because when we create this menu and you see shisho leaves and you see all these ingredients that we use around the globe, it would have had no home. It would have had no reason. The end consumer, the diner would have been confused. Why are they using these different ingredients? So when we created Alonzo Bronze, we created this traveler that is from Africa, but Alonzo Bronze traveled all around the world, and he was a traveler that traded ingredients, traded recipes, traded cooking techniques with other travelers from around the world. But when he's cooking things or when he's trading ingredients, he's still cooking that charred yuzu squid from the perspective of an African man.
wow,
So even though that ingredient may be a Japanese ingredient, it's still from our perspective. So when you look at our menu and when you taste our menu, it's going to taste very familiar, but the ingredients are going to taste a little bit different, something that you may have not tasted before. But it should all be a familiar process.
and in speaking of all these different areas that you're touching on, is there any spirituality? I'm sure some folks listening are kind of hearing it, because when I'm listening to your story, for some reason, there's some spirituality that's resonating with me when you talk about respecting and honoring ancestors, when you're talking about this creation of Alonzo Bronze and the way he's able to travel the world, and just the idea of soul food, as relates to Black folks. No accident that, what we prepare is referred to as soul food. Was there any spirituality incorporated, or any, spirituality that went into creating this experience?
Yeah, I think this whole process is very spiritual because in Afrofuturism, as you know, there's two kind of focuses.
Mhm.
There's like a focus on the future, which is very Afrofuturistic, and then there's also a focus on the past. I mostly focus on the past. I don't really focus too much on the future. I feel like we have to go back and address some stuff before we kind of get
No
to the next
question.
step. Um, so I think that when you start talking about respecting your ancestors, it's going to be very spiritual. And there's going to be certain things that happen that you can't even believe they happen. A couple things that happen. Alonzo is my great grandfather from the South. That's his first name. His first
Okay.
name was Alonzo. Um, the stuff that has happened, you never know the feeling of being in a dining room, 140, 150 people, and they're saying, I love this space, this Alonzo Braun story. And then every time I hear the word Alonzo, I know that that is my great grandfather's
Wow.
first name. So they don't know that.
Right.
But I know that I have figured out a way in this time period to keep my family's name alive, which if we don't keep our ancestors' name alive, then their stories die with them.
Right.
So
Right.
I figured out a way of like incorporating him into this, even though that my great grandfather is not Alonzo Bronze. My great grandfather was my great grandfather. It's just I use his first name to
Right.
continue to keep his name alive. So that's very spiritual. And my father actually, um, he showed me a picture of Alonzo, and I just got chills because I'm looking at him in his eyes in this picture, and I'm like, wow, we have a restaurant that's kind of continuing his legacy. So it's very spiritual, and then when you also talk about unleashing the ancestors, that becomes very spiritual as well.
Certainly.
Um, because you start to think about the stories, you start to think about the possibilities of what our ancestors were and what they could have been if they were regarded as humans.
Very good.
Which for the past 500-600 years, that's been debatable.
Right. And it's great. I don't remember where I read it, but they said that a person actually dies twice. First is a physical death, and the second time is the last time the name is spoken. So
Exactly.
by keeping that name alive, you're keeping the ancestors alive. So that's great, and I commend you on that.
Yep.
One more time for the folks that are listening, where is the restaurant located?
Yep. Bronze. We're on H Street. We're in DC. You gotta come check us out. We're in H Street Northeast, not Northwest. So you're gonna have to come. You got to come down a little bit.
Excellent, excellent. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And today we are joined by Keem Hugley, creator of the Bronze Restaurant, the first Afrofuturistic restaurant, the first of its type. So, what other places did you draw inspiration from to get this thing going? What other things kind of motivated you? What other realms kind of helped you to shape this vision and bring it to life?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question that I haven't been asked yet. Um, but it's very important because inspiration is everything,
Mhm.
and you have to be able to give credit to the people who inspire you. First off, it's Yatasha Womack, and I've talked about that a lot. But the book Afrofuturism has
Mhm.
been one of the biggest inspirations. But when I got introduced to it, now I'm in the door. Now I started to realize other inspirations as well. And that's going to be like Mary Ellen Pleasant, Robert Reed Church, from Memphis, O.W. Gurley. I'm trying to think of some other ones. Annie Malone, Williams
Mhm.
Lettiesdorf. Williams Lettiesdorf was, basically the creator of San Francisco, and he was from St. Croix, which is where my mother's family is from. And Williams-Lettersdorf was so impactful that the Mexican government, when they controlled more territory on the West, they recruited him to be almost an ambassador in Mexico. And then America eventually, the United States eventually um, uh, created a pact with him to come back on the United States side.
Right.
But when you think about these people, um, these were like these were I mean to do it in the scenario that they were in, where some of them had to pass as white just to be able to own their businesses. I think
Right.
about my mother. My mother is very light skinned from Brooklyn. She could, in that time period, most likely pass as white. She's not white at all.
Right.
And you think about some of those people, they had to use those things just to operate a business. I mean, that's huge inspiration from that. And then present day inspiration, um, it's actually this book called 47. Um, you think about Lovecraft Country and what they did with just unchaining that TV show, probably unchained it so much that it's only one season. We'll never see another season.
Right.
I
Right.
love Crab. They touch some points that not everybody probably agree with.
Right.
Kehinde Wiley, um, Cabin in the Sky. Do you remember Cabin in the Sky?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Cabin in the Sky. I remember when I
Uh,
first watched Cabin in the Sky, my mind was blown, and
yes.
I was like, because seeing the way that they moved without any other influence,
Right.
and you just start think about, man, what if in that time period to when, I mean, you see the way they dressed, the way they
Yes.
looked, the way their hair was, the way they danced, the character.
Yeah.
You imagine, like, what if that was supported freely at that
Yeah.
time? Imagine all the possibilities from Black film and other um, vertical integrations at that point as well. Other integrations that could have happened if the people in that time were able to be who they truly wanted to be, and it was
Right.
fully supported. Huge inspirations, and I would say restaurants inspirations um, would be things that were sometimes not of our perspective, but Carbone is one of my favorite restaurants in the world. Just the way their whole business model is, LVMH, the things that they do, um, and then uh, looking at those inspirations, even though they're not from our perspective, it's the wanting to create from the
Gotcha.
freedom that they create from. That would all kind of jab into to what bronze is.
No, that's great. Yeah, you definitely, who knows where you're going to find inspiration,
No, for
and,
sure.
and like you say, it's about unchaining. You also have to unchain yourself and open yourself up to various forms of influence and so forth that may be coming from spaces and places that you're not used to or not even thinking of at the time. So I think that's great. Believe it or not, man, we are coming up on the close of this episode. And one of the things I would like to ask you to kind of bring this to a close, what do you see as the future of this restaurant? Where do you want it to go to?
So we want to open bronze around the world. So we want to open in 5 markets around the world: um, Las Vegas, Miami, Paris, um, and then maybe figuring out where we want to touch. On the motherland, maybe 2 or 3 there. But we want to be one of the biggest restaurant groups in the world, and that doesn't mean to have the most restaurants. Subway is probably the biggest, fast food chain
Right.
spot in the world. That doesn't really mean that they're the biggest restaurant group in the world.
Gotcha.
We want to open in the impactful places. We also want to show what's possible. We want to show that our concepts can travel around the world and be sustainable. I think it's very important for us to run the sub 4 minute mile to show that it's possible.
That's great. And once again, like I said, I like this idea of, and you're speaking to it, just kind of removing, any type of barriers, any type of obstacles, and just leaving it open and free. So I just want to thank you, brother, for taking the time, and also want to invite you back, because I'm enjoying the conversation. And I feel like there's much more to be said about what it is you're doing and what you want to accomplish with this. So I'm leaving the door open. I want you to come back and speak with us, speak with the listeners and so forth. I'm sure they want to hear from you. So that is another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. So one more time, sir, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, you can find Into the Afroverse on YouTube, on the Afrofuturism Network page. And you can also go to afrofuturismnet.com for those of you looking to support what we're doing here at the Afrofuturism Network. And a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Have a good day.